So this is called chemistry. The smell of science makes me horny. Smell is the sense tied most closely to human memory. So when I sense any use of potassium chlorate, a white crystalline compound well stocked in science laboratories and often used for combustion, I remember how it feels to have the fire of orgasm sizzle its way through my body and melt a liquid path down my legs. The chemical's odor singes my nostrils and flashes me back to the sensation of a chilly marble countertop pressed against my back, to the press of fingers digging into my supple thighs, to the slick pressure of rounded glass slipping in and out. And it's what I remember most about him. We needed a scientist to impress the hospital donors with the tour of the lab. I planned to find an excuse to use him. I spent the following week visiting the lab to get a sense of his work. His area of interest was biochemistry, and I was certainly interested in his chemistry. I came to notice how his hands flexed tightly, fighting against the latex gloves each time he cupped a beaker full of liquid. I watched as he gradually pushed the tip of the lengthy pipette into the stickiness of the gel and ejected its contents. I'd secretly grazed my hand across my chest as he pinched and lifted the bell jar by its perky nipple-like top and used the glassware to create a vacuum. That evening I found him bowed over a polarizing light microscope, his pert little ass hidden by the draping of his white lab coat. He stopped upon noticing my arrival. "Do you know much about potassium chlorate?" he asked. I squinted as I retook his gaze and shook my head no, undoubtedly revealing my confusion, if not disappointment, by the sudden topic shift. It's a fairly common compound, yet incredibly powerful. What's so amazing about it is that it looks unassuming, but when combined with something sweet, it releases a surprising amount of energy. With that, he closed the remaining distance between our bodies, and reaching with one hand, slowly grazed a pad of his thumb across my smooth lower lip. The touch tingled lips above and below my waist. I watched as he lifted his hand to his mouth and tasted his thumb where my mouth had just been. I found something sweet. I think we should experiment. Removing his hand from my body, he reached into the deep pocket of his white lab coat and then pulled out a glass test tube. I gripped the lab bench a little tighter. The slender cylinder slipped easily onto his middle finger. His sly expression disappeared, and a look of intense concentration took its place as he leaned forward and leisurely ran the weighty tip of his tongue from the bottom of my soaked sex to the tip of my throbbing clit, making sure to increase pressure during his ascent. I felt his tongue flick vigorously over my clit while he slipped into me with his glass-shrouded finger. The tube glided easily along my slick folds, and its rounded tip bumped against all the right places. The combination of his tongue and the tool shot jagged electric currents between my legs, causing me to twitch, my legs to wobble, my heart to race, my breath to become shallow, moans to escape, my head to roll back, my hands to tighten their grip, and my mind cloud with the sharp thrill of sexual release. Fingers of his free hand gripped my ass when the height of my orgasm hit, causing me to groan out an "oh God" that echoed throughout the lab, and I pushed his mouth away to abate the overwhelming intensity. He slipped out of me, rose from his knees, and stood silently watching as my body calmed. Once my breath had slowed, I raised my head, attempting to fight the post-peak weariness. Wanting to please him and willing for more, I grabbed the waistband of his pants, unbuttoned and unzipped them, and pushed them down off his sturdy legs. Next, I headed for the buttons of his collared shirt and painstakingly attempted to undo them all. Sensing my lingering fatigue, he assisted and then finally removed his boxers, letting his solid shaft stand free. He stood there mostly naked, draped in his lab coat like a Central Park flasher with a PhD. Reaching out, I coiled his cock in my hand and he groaned while I began tugging with my tightened grip. With equal force, he clenched the wrist of my offending hand and pulled me off. Taking advantage of my surprise and of his hold, he spun me around and pressed me forward against the lab bench so that its edge that once pushed along my spine now settled against my abs. Like a yogi in a bow of submission, I stretched my arms forward to steady myself, carelessly pushing aside bottles, scales, and other miscellaneous laboratory equipment. I was poised for sexual satisfaction, not scientific measurement. He yanked at my hips and I shuffled to a wider stance. His knuckles bumped along my crease as his hand guided his powerful cock inside me, slipping in deeply and filling me like a man should in a way that glass could never match. "Oh shit, you're tight," he said with a groan. I clenched around him for added effect. The pumping started easily at first, long and steady, allowing my faded excitement to bubble back to the surface like liquid in a beaker over low heat. In this eased pace, I was able to press my pelvis forward enough to knock my clit against the brass handle of the drawer beneath me. The pressing of his hips repeatedly shoved his cock in and out of me, and the handle against my center, bringing it to a sensitive, plump peak. With my female firearm triggered, I felt myself growing wetter with every intrusion, his pleasured moans serving as a catalyst to my excitement. Now edgy with pleasure and eager for speed, I shoved my ass toward him, drawing him in deeper and signaling my desire. His pace quickened, and he pummeled my soaking pussy with plunged force. The sound of my ass smacking against his skin and the flaps of his coat ticking against the bench added to the rising symphony of our sex. My shallow breathing accelerated, and the electricity that resonated between my thighs prickled swiftly to my limbs, signaling my oncoming climax. I pulled his hand from my hip and used his fist to bite back the intensity. But the taste of his coppery skin, coupled with his pumping, overwhelmed me, and my body shuddered as I came with electric force. He pulled his hand free from my mouth, yanked my body up from my sprawled pose, and with rapid-fire released his cum into me. We leaned together as our breathing calmed and the heat of our bodies cooled. I turned and switched my resting place from his chest to the countertop and looked upon him with a glazed gaze. He gradually buttoned his lab coat, and once completely cloaked, he advanced with equal lethargy. "What did you learn from our little experiment?" he asked, using a finger to draw lazy yet tantalizing figure eights around my belly button. I grabbed the wrist of the wandering hand, cupped his palm against my breast, and responded, "It's all about chemistry."